So this is our continuing series on unsound chess, and one of the things that we need to watch in chess is playing too much blitz chess. Now there are people who live and die with blitz chess. For instance, at my age, I prefer blitz chess, but the fact is that blitz chess is, in general, not a good practice, and it's somewhat destructive to your actual longer games. And the reason why is that impulse control is loosened too much. There's a tendency just to jump at the first acceptable move you're making and lose precision. And it goes well beyond that. It gets almost ridiculous in some cases. But the way to play blitz chess is to limit the amount of blitz chess you play. Blitz chess tournaments in particular are terrible. You don't want to play too many of them in a row. Too many games in a row without stopping and analyzing and looking and learning. If you're not learning anything from it, then it becomes like a form of mental placation. It tends to create euphoria. So, I mean, from what I understand, there are people like that are being treated for drug addiction and alcoholism and various things through chess. So, this can become a substitute for thinking, and it should be doing the opposite. So, I'm going to give you an example of a game now, which is a blitz chess game that I played. And it's against a fairly highly rated opponent that is playing just terribly. And I run into these people, and in some cases they blunder their queens, and you don't know what they're doing. They're just having a good time out there. I don't know if they're drinking or, how they got that rating, but they have thousands of games in many cases. So the key to this game, however, is impulse control. And we're talking about impulse control on my part because someone once said, look for a better move after seeing a good one. And I believe it was Dr. Emanuel Lasker, who was the person who taught me chess in terms of book reading. The first book I ever had was Emanuel Lasker, and I tend to prefer Emanuel Lasker. He shares similar heritage to mine, and he was a mathematician, and there are a lot of things that Emanuel Lasker said. I believe, however, it was Dr. Tarrasch who said, sit on your hands. So somebody said, if you see a good move, don't make it. Sit on your hands and look for a better move. Maybe sit on your hands for a full minute or something like that. I think Tarrasch said the sit on your hands thing, but I'm quoting loosely, so I tend to prefer Lasker said everything, but I'm sure that's not true, but somebody knows. So the fact is that this is a good example of that in a game. And it's also an example of rating intimidation. So we've talked about rating intimidation in other videos. And I see that people are seeing the rating intimidation videos, although I don't have the counter enabled on YouTube, so people can't really see how many views most of these are actually getting. So we're going to go through this with the engine again. And I haven't looked at this with the engine, but we're going to go d4, e5. This is a game I played just this morning, and this is the England Gambit, and this could easily be considered the next installment of our England Gambit, and I think I'm just going to skip that installment because that's what this is. And once again, I said it's not a sound opening, and the interesting thing is once you get over, I've mentioned that I open profiles not all at once because that's not something the chess sites like you to do. I just do it. After a period of time, I get tired of one profile and I start experimenting with another. Like, what would happen if I moved f5 against every opening? Let's see how high I can get. Can I get over 2200 moving f5 against no matter what and who? And amazingly, I can get very high just moving f5 against people on the first move as black. So in this particular case, once you get over the 2100 range, a huge number of people decline the England Gambit. So this is an England Gambit declined. I think they go into a little bit of shock. They look at the rating and they say, wait a minute, this person couldn't be making a mistake. This person's not a potser. At the lower levels, everybody jumps all over that pawn and takes it, which is the right move. So somebody thinks that I've done a great deal of book learning on the England Gambit, and there's just not a lot of book learning to be done. So to me, this is the proper response, although the computer doesn't recommend it. And these players who are d4 players often have a particular pattern in their brain that they just have to adopt no matter what. And I play f5 here. So now we have a combination of not only my England Gambit, but the Latvian Gambit played in a kind of a weird fashion, and maybe even a bit of Dutch. So once again, the computer has me as an advantage after this move. And I wouldn't recommend it. It's not the greatest move in the world, but it's fairly aggressive. And so knight to c3 is played. It's a decent developing move. d6. And now a strange move, a3. Um, I guess the computer says it's adequate because it doesn't lose or gain or do very much, but the fact is that a3 doesn't really threaten anything at this point because the bishop can move to d4. And, if he was going to move something, at this point b4 was perfectly possible. If you look at it, if he plays b4 and I take it, I believe I lose my bishop to queen to a4 check. So the fact is that, if he's going to play b4, play it now. So maybe he's expecting me to play a6 or a5 to protect it, but there's nothing being attacked since I can move to d4. Actually, I can also move to b6, because I have a pawn on d6 which covers the c5 square, so he can't push and trap that bishop. So at this rate, knight to f6 is the move that's made. I'm just ignoring that threat, and he really needs to look at e3, 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 and there is a b4 there, so at which point I move the bishop to d4 because he hasn't moved d3 yet. So h6, a rather amazing move. So this tells me two or three things. Number one, this player is scared to death I'm going to move knight to g4 and attack his f2 square, which is kind of silly. He's just weakened his kingside dark squares hilariously. And number two, instead of playing e3, which is the right move, locking in his bishop, he wants to greedily get that bishop out no matter what and not lock it in. And two, instead of playing e3 like he should, he's going to try to get an e4 right away, which he considers to be something in his... I don't see how he's going to get an e4 no matter what. Maybe he thinks he's going to move queen to c2, then e4, and gain time, or I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about what he thought, but I remember a good friend of mine who I used to go to the university with, got the privilege of playing speed chess with Bobby Fischer in his early days, and he claimed that Bobby Fischer used to make fun of Ben Larson for moving his rook pawns all the time. So here we have somebody moving the rook pawns all the time for apparently very few reasons. So, okay, we play castles kingside, expecting e3, and what do we get? We get bishop to g4, which loses instantly. So he thinks he's preventing knight to g4. He thinks bishop takes f2 check, knight to g4 check. He just takes my knight. I take his bishop, and I'm down 2 pieces for the 1. And he's got the rook file open and stuff like that. So instead I play just bishop takes pawn check, and this player goes into semi-shock because he needs to move king to d2 now. That's the preferred computer move, which leaves him down only about 3. So he's lost. At this point he takes, he gets the check, and now he snaps it up like I blundered, and I check again. And now I'm going to win. So it says he absolutely has to move king to g3 here, which he does not. I take. And now look at the dark squares on the king side. g3. Oh, there's a check coming. So it says the computer says he needs to move queen to c1. Okay, so now if you read my book about why you don't need a chess teacher, one of the books I recommend reading is Zonsko-Borofsky, The Art of Combination, I think it's called. I haven't read that in many years, but he devotes a whole chapter on things like pawns on f6 and e6 and e3 and f3 and the virtues of having a pawn in that chokehold of a place. And the fact is that I can't wait to play e3 in this position. I'm begging to play e3. I'm wanting to play e3. I have these visions of playing e3 and then taking his bishop check and then moving rook to, or queen to g3, or checking and moving queen to g3, or just moving e3, which creates a mate in 1 threat right away. That's very hard to meet. So I want to move e3, and that's in my brain from all my Zonsko-Borofsky upbringing. And he moves queen to d2, and I go with my hand ready to mouse over pawn to e3, which is a crushing move, I'm sure. And suddenly, I remember Emanuel Lasker's admonition, look for a better move. And the better move is there, and the better move I played. Although I must admit, e3 is very tempting, and I believe e3 is probably a perfectly good move here. So I play this move, and that unhinges him from protection of his queen, and I take it and he resigns. So that's the end of this horrible game from this fairly highly rated guy, and I have no explanation. This is a good example of why I don't publish names, and I don't publish like online handles, and I don't say this game was played here and there, and this was because it's embarrassing. Everybody has these terrible games. I have them, so this was a unfortunate situation, but it was a good example of I could have played a great move. Now, I just out of curiosity, I want to go back and see how the computer evaluates E3. We're going to try and add a variation. Okay. Now let's see. The fact is that it's just as strong. So maybe maybe I should have just played E3 and followed my Zonskobrovsky instincts instead of my Emanuel Lasker admonition. But I must say that that would have prolonged the game. So rook takes and then queen takes ended the game really fast because nobody likes to play queen down like that. It's embarrassing and you want to run. So it did have that virtue. So thank you, and this was our video for today.